Welcome back to the Boxster House. Today we're going to go through the 99 base Boxster and actually pull out the dash, then reinstall the original Metropole Blue leather dash that was in the Boxster S. Here, just briefly before we get started, these are some of the tools that you're going to need. First off, you're going to need, and what's not pictured here is a 10mm wrench. That's to disconnect the battery. You're going to want to disconnect the battery because we're going to remove the steering wheel and the airbag, both driver and passenger, and you want to have the battery disconnected and let the car sit for 15-30 minutes so that battery can fully discharge before you unplug any of the airbags, just to avoid that airbag warning light. For the steering wheel, you're going to need this, which is a 24mm socket. That's kind of the biggest one that you'll need. Also not pictured here is a torque wrench. Whenever we're done and we're putting the steering wheel back in the car, we will be torquing that to 34 pound-feet. So you'll need a torque wrench for that. That's pretty much the only thing in this process that we'll need a torque wrench for. Outside of that, I've just got some panel tools for getting the radio and the air vents and that kind of thing out. And then pretty much what you'll need, the majority of the screws are going to be T20s. So you'll need a Torx T20. You'll need a T30. That is for the bolts that are on the sun visors. So those two, and then same on the other side, are T30s. You need to pull those off to get the A-pillar trims out. And then the T27 is for removing the steering wheel airbag. That one you will need. There's two little Allen keys right behind the steering wheel that I'll walk you through once we get there. The other piece that you'll need is a 13mm. This is for the two bolts that are under the dash to remove the passenger airbag. That one's pretty important. You will need a T10, really small Torx, for a couple of screws that are on the steering column. You'll want to have some painter's tape, or just, I like painter's tape because it doesn't leave any residue, but just to hold your clock spring in place so that it's not flopping around while we're doing this. And then finally, kind of, this is, you don't need this, but it is really helpful, just a low profile wrench or ratcheting wrench, and that is to get at the speakers that are in a really precarious position, and quite a pain in the ass to get out if you don't have a low profile ratcheting wrench. Lastly, get some plastic baggies and some Sharpies. I just throw those in the car with me so that as I'm taking bolts out, I can kind of associate them with a certain part. So what I like to do is all the dash speaker bolts go in one Ziploc bag labeled. All of the center stack, radio surround, that kind of thing, bolts go in one bag. Steering wheel bolts go in another. Air vent bolts go in another. Airbag bolts. And then finally, kind of once we get to the actual dash, I will remove the screws from the dash for the passenger side, put the passenger side ones in a bag, put the center ones in a bag, and then put the driver side ones in a bag. That way I'm not looking through. There's probably 20 screws that hold this whole dash into place. So I like to know kind of what general area they go into. But aside from that, it's really not a tough project at all. There's really just like a couple screws here and there that are frustrating to get to, but other than that, it's pretty straightforward. So let's get started. All right, so here we are on the inside of the car. Battery is disconnected. Pro tip: before you actually disconnect the battery, open your doors. In my case, I actually cracked the roof just because I'm outside in the shade and I want to have some airflow. But if you open the doors, the windows will drop before you disconnect the battery. And if you disconnect it while they're shut, they will not drop, and you have to like push on the glass and make sure that it doesn't break trying to get it out from underneath the little lip that it goes into whenever it closes. So just do that before you get started here. So now what we're gonna do is start with the center stack. So essentially how this works is we take off this panel, unplug everything behind it, and then you'll have access to kind of the radio screws, the climate control screws, that kind of thing. And then finally this whole surround pulls out on its own. The radio is typically held in with a couple of T20s. I believe for some reason the climate control is held in with Phillips screws. So just have both of those tools ready, and then obviously some panel popping tools to get the panels off. So let's get started here. See if I can do this with one hand. Yeah, there we go. So that just pops out. The yellow, green, pink are all going to just pull off. You have to kind of wiggle them away. There's no clips or anything holding them in. They're just on there kind of tight. The bottom one, which is your cigarette lighter, this one does have a clip. You just squeeze the two tabs on the outside and it kind of pulls out just like that. And then for whenever you're putting this back together, the yellow, green, and pink plugs are actually color coordinated on the trim piece, so you won't forget where those go. You can just refer back to this as you're plugging them in. They're color matched, kind of tells you exactly where to go. Let's go ahead and pop the other side of the panel off. So what I'm doing is I'm going up underneath, and then same thing. If you have a newer model, there will be a little plug going in here. That's where your intermittent wiper selector goes. There's usually a little knob right here. This is a 1999, so it doesn't have that. But it's just one little clip right here that doesn't have a release button. It just pulls out, but it's smaller than these. And then for these, some of your cars, if you don't have the traction control or PSM, you won't have this plug. In this case, this car did come with the traction control, so it does have the plug. And then as for getting these off, let's see if I can do it with one hand. If I can, that would be kind of impressive. All right, I am not gonna try and break this. So what I like to do for these is get that panel trim tool and just wedge it kind of in between here and kind of push out as you're pulling. That helps me a lot. So let me get those kind of prepped and ready, and we'll come back to that. Plug just comes out like that. We're gonna set that aside. And then the rest of these are exactly the same. You really gotta put a little oomph into it, but they do just come right off. So there you go. Put that to the side. All right, so I was able to get all these unplugged. Again, just kind of wiggle them off. I didn't even use the pry tool on these. If it's the first time they've ever been out, you might need to. So I set them down on the ground. Eventually, we'll put kind of all of this together into the trunk. That's what I like to do, just to keep it all together. And then the baggie of hardware that we'll cover here in a second will kind of go with all of these pieces. So next, this is the older style pre-facelift center surround. So there's going to be 4 torque screws here. So 2 in the upper corners, 2 in the lower corners. These are all going to be T20s. And they're different T20s in my case. This has been out a few times here and there, so I don't know if this is like how it looks from the factory screw wise, but yeah, so essentially what we're going to do is first pull this panel off. This is just going to be held in with 2 little plastic tabs I like to pull them out of the actual climate control thing, and these are pretty brittle, so you can see this one is pretty mangled, but it still works. So I'm going to just pop it back onto the little spoke here that helps it stay in place, and then that's going to go with that stuff. Now what you'll see is behind here there's going to be 4 Phillips head screws, so I'm pretty sure that's how it comes from the factory. Obviously this not matching one isn't, but these are Phillips for some reason while the rest are Torx. A little bit weird. And then finally, for the radio, there's actually no screws holding in the radio. What you will need is some radio removal tools like this. So essentially what these do, and I will have to test this, but essentially they go in and kind of click in just like that, and you'll need 2 of them, which luckily I have the 2 right here. They came in this trim removal kit. This is just off of Amazon. It had a bunch of these. I've lost or mangled all the others, but luckily I have these that still work. So you basically just slip them into the little slots at the bottom of the radio, and then you just pull out. So as you can see, the radio just pulls right out. There's no screws or anything holding it in. To get these back out, I believe that you bend them in a certain way or angle them in a certain way, or there's some tabs on the side to get them out. I'm not going to worry about that right now. So really just pull that out. Once this is kind of out, of course here it's a tight fit, you're going to have some different connections. That's going to be your antenna, the main power supply, and then there's one back in there that I believe is for audio. I may have those switched, but these just need to be pulled out. So on this top one, there's going to be tabs on the outsides, so one right here and one right here. We're just gonna... There we go. Okay, so there's that one. The next one is going to be down here. It's just this main kind of tab right here on the right hand side, and then that should pull out as well. So wiggle that out, now you've got that, and then finally the antenna just kind of pops off. All right, next is going to be our T20s. Something that really helped me the first time I did this project was, as I removed each screw, I took pictures of where the screws go before I actually removed the screws, and then used the markup function on my phone or just any photo editing tool just to circle and number each screw as I removed it. So this kind of allowed me to keep track of every screw and its location to refer back to whenever I was installing the new dash, because the last thing that you want in this project is leftover screws that seemingly came out of nowhere. So this will help you avoid that. All right, and then for me, I know that the Torx screws are going to be what holds in the vents around. I know the Phillips are what holds in the climate controls, so I'm not going to put those in separate bags. It's pretty easy to tell, so let's just get these out of here. All right, so there you can see that as I pull on the climate, since we've got everything else out, it just kind of comes free. There goes my screw. So let's probably find that before we move on. Luckily the interior is pretty small, so not too many places to lose stuff. That'll change whenever we get to the screws that are up there, because there's a vent that they love to fall into. So that is removing the radio surround. Now that we have all of that out, if you have your climate control mounted in the center stack here like this, you'll have these little mounting brackets. They look like this. You'll have two of them. The other one is in there somewhere. So you'll have two of those. Those are needed if you have it mounted up here. I think there might be something else for if it's mounted down below, but in this car we have the GT3 console delete. If you do have the little panel that's down below in place of the console delete, for where that goes, you will need to remove it. It's really simple. There's two panels kind of on either side. Let me get this out of the way so that I can actually show you. So for the piece that is normally in the car, it's a little stack under here that is like a cubby, or your climate control might be there. There's going to be two panels on the sides. You go to the back of the panel and pull outwards and towards you, and they'll kind of pop off and forwards or backwards towards you. Same thing on this side. You would grab the panel, pull it out just with clips and pull it towards you. And then behind that, there will be some pieces of carpet padding that you'll do the same thing with. They'll kind of be a little bit further back, but you'll just pull them out and towards you. And then the surround, there are going to be a couple of torque screws kind of going into the sides that hold in the climates and the cubbies. And there's a metal bracket that comes out of this space here normally. You don't have to do anything with that metal bracket. It's just what the screws go into. But there should be 4 or 6 additional torques if you have that thing. 2 on each side is what I've seen. All right, let's get the climate control unplugged. So these come out pretty easily. There's just a button on the top. So let me actually show you. You can see kind of these little tabs right there, right there, right there, and right there. Those are going to be the tabs that you need to press to release these wires. All right, so there's that. It's our climate control. I'm gonna set that down there, ready to go. And then of course you can just kind of pull this out. You're gonna have to wiggle these wires out. Oh, and then of course, if your car is actually factory, you will have this, which is the just kind of ground for your radio. It's part of the security system. This just pulls kind of off. There we go. So it goes on that tab. That was some security thing for the radio. And this is just a piece that's mounted on your actual air vents. So now that that's out, that is everything that we need to do here, at least with the radio surround. So I'm going to seal up my radio surround bag, and I'm going to put all of that stuff in the trunk, and then we'll move on to the next piece. Okay, so now that we have the radio and the kind of surround out, we are going to move on to the A-pillars. You don't particularly need to do it in this order, but I like to just prep it. I'm not actually going to pull the A-pillars out. I'm just going to take the screws out of the sun visors to be ready for once we remove the air vents. So what you're going to need is a T30 for these 2 screws on both sides. Those are on the outer ones. And then you will also need a T20, and here you'll need to pull down on this little tab kind of on both sides of the visor. This is the inside closest to the center mirror, and you'll see a couple of T20s on both of those. So I like to take the T20s out first, so we will just knock those out here. And then same on the other side. So on these, there's a little, you don't actually pull these straight down, you kind of pull them back at an angle, like that, and you'll see that there's this plastic tab that's angled backwards, and that's why you don't just pull down. So if you just pull down really hard, you might break this. It's just a piece of plastic, so it goes on kind of at an angle. So just keep that in mind. So here, we'll do the same thing. Just pull back at an angle. And now we're ready to hit the T30s. And of course, once you have those open, this one does just kind of come off. You'll see that's where it mounts. And then we've got our sun visor. Sun visor is going to go on the floorboard until we put it back in. And then for these particular screws, I like to, rather than putting them in a baggie, I just throw these just back into their holes. That way I know exactly where they are. So that one, and then of course our little T20. Hopefully you would be doing this with a screwdriver, not your fingers. But since I'm holding a camera with one hand, I need to do it with my fingers. All right, so just throw those in there lightly. And then eventually, whenever we actually pull the air vents out, these are going to come out. There's a clip about right here, and another clip about right here, or maybe like right here and right here, that are kind of angled like this. So rather than pulling straight back or straight out, we're gonna pull kind of towards yourself in the driver's seat. That's kind of the angle these clips are at. But really, it just comes out like that. And then you'll see there are the clips and the holes that they slide into right there. Pretty straightforward. And then this just pops straight out. So I said all that stuff about waiting until we have the air vent out. You actually don't need to, so that's it. The main thing here to keep in mind is this trim piece back here, that you do need to have the air vent out to remove it. You also need to have the A-pillar trim out because of this clip is mounted to this piece that wraps all the way up to the center. Underneath this, these are two different pieces. There's one on each side. There's a bunch of clips kind of right here, right here, right here. So you want to pry those up easily or carefully. And then this piece, there's a couple clips right here that it's really easy to get out once you have the air vent out. But because of this that holds in the air pillar trim, you can't pull this piece out before you have the A-pillar out. All right, so I'm gonna repeat the same on the other side, and then we'll come back to the air vents. All right, so up next is the air vents. I'm going to show the driver's side air vent because this one has the plug that's a little bit more complicated. On the passenger side, in this spot, there is a little grill that you need to remove. You can use a trim tool and basically just go around the outside. But on this one, it's a little bit different. So on the light switch, you are going to need to pull just straight out. And then at the bottom of the light switch, there's a little slot. And you can use a pick or a small screwdriver, and you basically just need to press straight up. to release the mechanism that kind of holds this in, there's like a clip or something, and just like that, it pulls out. And then here you can see this little clip right here, this gold piece, that's what you're pushing on, and that releases a clamp that's inside the housing, if you can see the gold down in there. And that's what allows it to pull off. So once you've got that out, there's going to be 3 screws. There's going to be one right in here. This one is easy to miss, and if you miss it, it will snap if you try to force the thing out. So don't forget this one on the inside here. There is a similar one on the passenger side in that same spot, so that's why you have to pop the vent off on the passenger side. And then in addition to that one, there's going to be 2 over here, kind of on the outer edge. On this one, these are a little bit tough to get to, so I use just a ratchet because it gives me kind of enough clearance. And then, let's see. Hopefully for you, these aren't stripped. It seems like this one is probably stripped. In my car, so we'll pull that out and put it in our air vents baggie. So whenever you're done with this, you'll want to have 6 T20 Torx screws in this baggie, 3 on the driver's side, 3 on the passenger side. They're all exactly the same. For this one, we'll just use our normal screwdriver and pull this out. Again, with this one, the plastic piece that it kind of goes into is really brittle, mainly because these cars are 25 plus years old. So they're really easy to snap. So whenever you're screwing those screws back in, just go until it's tight and then stop. You don't want to over tighten it because it's literally just a little tiny piece of plastic. It's holding it up against the actual dash, and it snaps off really easily. And then finally, we'll do this last one over here. Just going to be on the lower side. It kind of seems like this one is also stripped, so I don't need to actually use the ratchet piece. Hopefully for yours it's not stripped and it might be a little harder to get out. Gosh, I keep dropping the damn thing. Alright, so there's that. Alright, so now that those screws are out, now we're going to use just a panel removal tool. Just kind of pry. I like to start with the inside here. Just be careful with your dash, of course. Just kind of pull out and it should pop. And then from there, just be kind of careful. There's another clip that kind of clips into this upper section here. But then you can just pull out. You want to pull not straight towards you. You want to pull kind of out of the car, almost at the same angle that the door is open. Because that kind of helps you. And then again, another tip is just on the vents. If you can see, whenever I close the vents, this plastic piece shows up. So whenever you're pulling this out, have your vent on the open so that it's kind of hidden behind this plastic piece. Otherwise, you risk kind of popping this plastic piece off. It's just a little ball, plastic ball socket thing that this piece pops onto. But whenever you're pulling it out and putting it back in, it's really easy to kind of knock that off or break it. So I like to have it open so that you can avoid that. Once you've got the vent kind of out like this, the next piece is going to be getting the actual plug undone. So this silver and the red, that's all part of this housing. So that's not going to go anywhere. The plug is this black piece back here. And then in addition to that, there's another plug right here that you'll see. It's kind of on this other side. see if I can pull it down. So this one is also in there. Be careful that you don't mess that up. So on this one, you just basically pry them apart. It should pop out. I'm gonna need 2 hands to do that and not rip any of the wires, but just keep in mind that that's there. And then for this plug, I also like to do like a pry tool or put a flathead screwdriver in there, just kind of wiggle it out. You can sometimes get a good grip on it with your fingers and be able to get it loose, but it's kind of tough. So let's go ahead and do that. So we'll get this plug undone. That one just kind of pulls out like that. And then on the back end side, I'm going to just kind of wiggle this plug off, and that's what it should look like. So that's your plug, that's your other wire here. And then whenever you're putting this back together, there is a shape here that is matched on this piece. And it's also just, you don't have too much play in this wire, so it's not very hard to get wrong. Once you put this back in, you just want to make sure that you plug those both in before putting the entire air vent back in, because there's no way to get under there and plug it in if you've already put the air vent in. All right, so now that that is done, we're going to take off the upper trim panel right after we do the same thing on the other vent. And then since we're here, the trim cover for the key, that just pops off. So it's rubber. You just need to grab a hold of it and pull it kind of straight out, and that pops right out. Throw that in the bag with your air vents, or in its own bag, kind of whatever you want to do there. All right, so here we are at the passenger side. I've already taken out the 2 screws that are on the outside, and then since we're here, I just want to show you how to get to the 3rd screw over here. So just like that, fling it across the car. That's the best way to do it. Joking aside, there's our 3rd Torx right in there. And then, so this, I believe, is the ambient temperature sensor for inside the car. So once we pull this out, there is actually a plug that we need to undo that I will also show you. So let me remove this screw and then we'll come back. All right, so we've got the air vent out on the passenger side. And then what you'll see here, you can see that there's pink where all of the screws go. But then inside here, there's a plug for this sensor. And so to get that out, there's basically tabs. You can see one right here on top. There's a similar one on the bottom. You just need to get your hand in there and squeeze both of those tabs and pull it open, and it pops right out. It's not very hard. So just unplug that now. You can just leave the wire hanging in there. Just remember that it's there for whenever you come back, because that will need to be unplugged, because that sensor comes out when the dash comes out. Now that we've got the air temperature sensor unplugged, the air vents removed on both sides, A-pillars removed, we can go ahead and pull off the trim for kind of the upper vent. So to start here, we're going to want to pull off this plastic piece that goes over the interior sensor. This piece, honestly, you should probably just order a new one, because the tabs are going to break. There are 2 little tiny tabs, I think right there and right there, that are non-existent on this one, long gone. But this piece sits directly in the sun, and is almost always going to snap whenever you pull it off. And then once those 2 tabs are broken and you try to put it back on there, once you get it in, there's no way for it to, like, those 2 tabs are the only things that hold it down against your dash up front. So it'll always kind of look like that, which is really annoying. And then, of course, to make things even more pleasurable, This little tiny plastic piece is $84. Ask me how I know. So go ahead and order yourself a new one. Pro tip, don't go off eBay. The one they send you is also going to be broken. You have to order a new one from Pelican or like Suncoast, something like that, if you want those tabs to be on there. But once you have that off, it's pretty easy to get the rest of the panel off. You just need to wedge a piece up under there, and then it just kind of pops off, and just go around the dash, and it'll kind of keep popping for you all the way around. One thing to keep in mind is that for these pieces, once you get them out here, I can, so they just kind of slide up and out like that. So there are clips on kind of both ends. So here you can see this is the piece closest to the windshield, so it goes in like this. There are going to be clips on this side, but there are also some little clips on this side closest to you. So whenever you're popping the tabs with your pry tool, make sure that you don't just pull up this end and maybe not miss like the back ones, because that's a good way to miss the back ones. Make sure that you get all of them out. And then, of course, once you actually get the dash out, and it's much easier to reach back in this section here, and there's a nice little broken tab that I found. But so some of these tabs will inevitably fall off. So once you get the dash out and you can reach these easily, make sure to go through these tabs and check on if you're putting this dash back in or if there's a new one. Just make sure that there's no broken pieces in there, because if there are, and you try to put this piece back in and there's a broken one where there's not a broken one on your trim piece, it won't be able to go in, obviously. So just kind of do that as a check whenever you're putting it back in. And then same exact thing on the driver's side. Let's go over there. So now we're on the driver's side. Let's grab our pry tool. We'll just stick it in there, pry up, and then just kind of follow it around. Now you can pull that out, inspect the tabs, see how many you broke off. In this case, looks like there's two missing, one right there and then one right there, but those were already missing. And then we'll put that in the trunk. So now you have all of that complete. At this point, pretty much the only pieces remaining that we need to take off before we start actually undoing the dash is going to be removing the actual lower center console. This is a lot easier if you do it at the same time as your radio surround and all of that. Of course, we need to take out the airbag, we need to take out the steering wheel, and we need to take off the gauge cluster. This whole piece removes as one unit. And then finally, the dash speakers. So I will usually do steering wheel, then gauge cluster, then speakers, then airbag. So you can take the gauge cluster out, you can take the rear speakers out or the dash speakers out before you take the steering wheel or the gauge cluster out. However, I've had this thing out so many times in these cars that I pretty much refuse to do it without the steering wheel out of the way, because it makes it just that much easier. And then of course this is a ton easier to reach whenever you don't have the gauge cluster in the way. So that's why I go in that order. Give me a couple seconds here and we will get started on removing the steering wheel. Steering wheel removal. So quick reminder, before you start on the steering wheel, make sure that the battery for the car has been disconnected for at least 15 to 30 minutes, just to make sure that the tire system is not charged, because you don't want to have an airbag light come on the dash or be messing with live electronics around airbags. Obviously, you don't want an airbag blowing in your face, but also the airbag light that comes on the dash. If that comes on, I believe that you have to go to a dealer to get it reset, which is just a pain in the ass. So, that being said, the tools that you're going to need here are going to be a T27. So I use this and some channel locks to get the leverage that I need. But essentially, there are holes back here behind the steering wheel. See right here. And then same thing on the other side. There's one right there. Those two you need to loosen in order to get the steering wheel airbag out. And then once we have the airbag out, the steering wheel will take the 24 millimeter socket, and then you'll also need to have a T15, or I'm sorry, no, a T10 and a Phillips head screwdriver to get these trim surrounds off. Lastly, the key. You'll need your key because the best way to do this is to turn the key on. Of course, battery's disconnected, but we need to turn the steering wheel so that it's kind of horizontal, vertical, up and down, right? Because that will allow you to have the most room for getting the screwdriver back in here. All right, so here you can see we're unscrewing the airbag. On the back, you can do it a little bit, and then just once you can tell that there's play in the airbag, let it go. Then we'll want to turn the steering wheel the other direction and do the same thing and put the T27 into the steering wheel. Twist it until the airbag is ready to come out. So that should be enough there. So now we are able to pull the steering wheel out, or airbag out. So before I do that, I'm just going to kind of hold it, straighten the steering wheel. So here, once we pull this out, you're going to see some wires behind the airbag. First one to pull out is the actual airbag wire. You can kind of just wedge your finger behind it, pull it straight out, just like that. And then there is, so that's the only one that's holding the airbag in. So now we can put our airbag to the side, and now we've just kind of got the steering wheel left. So the next one that we're going to disconnect is going to be these two grounding wires. There's one right here, and there's one right here. So these both can just be pulled out, just like that. Just take a picture, use your phone, something like that, to see how these wires are routed. If you have the 3-spoke steering wheel as opposed to the 4-spoke steering wheel, there's a slightly different routing. Like this one, I think, goes kind of over the top on the 3-spoke one. It doesn't matter that much, but I like to have as professional of a job done as possible. So just keep in mind how that is fastened. And so 24 millimeter bolt for the steering wheel. We've got our ratchet and socket here. You'll need an extension to reach into the steering wheel, but essentially you'll just need to put that on there and then get that loose. And then what I would recommend is, first of all, put a mark on the steering wheel. So that red line right there and the red line kind of behind there is my alignment for the steering wheel so that we can put it back on straight. And then, of course, before you actually pull this nut all the way off, go ahead and get the steering wheel loose. So pull on the steering wheel. Make sure that it is loose and not on there tight. Otherwise, if you pull that completely off, you'll have to put some weight behind the steering wheel and you risk smacking yourself in the face. So to avoid that, just while the nut's still on there but loosened, pull the steering wheel loose, and then there is also a washer behind that nut, so go ahead and get the washer out if you can. In my case, I can't, so I'm just going to pull it out like that. And then of course your steering wheel comes off. Go ahead and push the wires through the steering wheel, this hole. So there you go. Now that steering wheel can go over to the side. And now this is where we'll want to grab our blue tape, or just tape of your choice. So we want the clock spring to be pointing up. There's an arrow right here on the actual clock spring, and then there is a arrow on the plastic housing. Those should match so that it is straight, just like this. And then just throw a piece of painter's tape across the top to hold it in place so that it doesn't wobble around like that. All right, so we've got the clock spring taped. Now we're going to pull off the steering column surround. There's going to be 4 Phillips screws here. There we go. Now that I've actually got them out, we'll throw them in our baggie labeled steering wheel and steering column. And that bag is also going to have the nut and the washer for the actual steering wheel. So we'll set those to the side. Now, once you have the Phillips head screws removed, this piece just simply pulls off. So it's around the clock spring. So you want to pull this off, guide it around the wires, and then set that to the side. Now that we have the Phillips screws out and the front of the steering column cover off, we can go to our T10, the 2 Torx on either side. And these basically just hold the top and the bottom of the steering wheel casing together. They're really tiny, so make sure that you don't lose them. I'm going to put them in my same bag as the rest of the steering column bolts, and then there's a similar one on this side. So grab it and throw it in the bag as well. So now the top piece should come off, and you can kind of pull up and away, just like this. You can see this has been off before. I labeled it upper. It only really goes on one way, so you don't need to do that. The bottom piece is going to be just a smidge tougher to get off and on than the top. So these rubber pieces from the stalks just slide on and off, so just make sure that you pull that out. You can also kind of push it away since it's just rubber. Same thing on this side. This one will just kind of push away, and then of course make sure that those 2 pins are out, and then this should just kind of pull down and away, just like that. Now you can throw that over with your parts, and this is how we will leave the steering column. So these rubber pieces, whenever you put it back on, just make sure that you slide these into the steering column casing kind of as they were. It's really easy. And then of course we'll move on now to the actual gauge cluster. Once you have the gauge cluster out, there are 2 more T20 Torx screws kind of back here that hold this piece on. This piece, there are 2 little clips down here that we'll have to just pop those out, and then it will come off. And if we're not removing the steering wheel stalks, which in this case we're not, you'll need to kind of bend this. You can see that it's split here. These two pieces are split. It's kind of bendy. So you can kind of bend it out and around. Just make sure that you don't catch any of the wires that are around the steering column. But we'll come to that here in a second. All right, so now we are going to remove the gauge cluster. This comes out kind of as one piece. You don't have to pull these out separate from this cover. The main piece is that behind your hazard button and behind this little microphone cover or whatever it is, there are two T20 torque screws, one on either side. So to get to those, you're gonna need to grab your hazard button, and then this one, basically you just push it out and then it just simply slides off. You should be able to wriggle it out of there. There are two little kind of slots on either side that you can use to help. It just slides on and off of this piece here, and then there's your torque screw. Additionally, you will need a pair of needle nose pliers to get this out. We're also going to remove this. There's two little tabs on either side that you just kind of squeeze, but then to make it really easy, I like to squeeze both, and then with my other hand grab just a piece of this plastic with my needle nose pliers and pull outwards, and then that just slides straight towards you. First, let's go ahead and pull this cover off. This one, so on my car, this is all soft touch plastic that is super easy to scratch. So in this case, this has been out a couple of times, so I can get it out with my fingernail, like so. But what I like to do whenever it's in there tight and you don't want to scratch the surrounding soft touch, I like to get something really small, like a small flathead or a pick, and just stick it into one of these center pieces that has an actual hole, and that usually gives you enough leverage to just pop it out, and then it just slides out towards you. And then of course your torque screw is way back in there. If you can see it kind of straight back. So that one you want to be kind of careful with so that you don't knock it off and lose it inside that hole. Let's go ahead and get those two screws out, and then we'll move on to next steps. All right, so I have pulled out the two screws from the gauge cluster. Now we're pulling out the hazard signal button. I've already squeezed in the two tabs and pulled it out a little bit, but essentially just squeeze the two tabs and then pull straight out towards you. With all of that kind of goes into one baggie. There should be two screws that are the same, and then your button, your hazard switch, and the vent piece. From there, essentially what you're going to do is there's going to be two kind of tabs that we'll need to kind of lift off. So on this side, there'll be one, just lift straight up. Same thing on this side, lift straight up. And then once it's out, you can kind of pull it towards you just a little bit and lean it forward. And then on the back, you're going to have three plugs. There's going to be a blue plug, a white plug, and a black plug. So on these, you simply need to press in right above this white piece, and then with your other finger, just kind of flip that white piece upwards, just like that. And then that disconnects the plug, and you can pull it away. So we'll go to the next one here. Now your gauge cluster is completely out. Oh, I completely missed this. So those are the three main ones. You're also going to need to get this plug out. This one, once you've gotten the other ones disconnected, you just rotate it up so that it's facing you like this. And then this tab right here, you just push out, pull down on the plug and it'll pop right out. Now it is actually completely out, and we can set that to the side. So now your gauge cluster is out, and if I can get my camera to focus, there we go. You can see that you're left with 4 plugs in total. This one, that's your hazard switch. That comes out of this separate hole over here. And then you've got your black, your white, and your blue. The blue is the only one that's in this right-hand section. And then your black and white are on the right-hand section. If you have a facelifted model, which is 2003 or 2004, it may be 2002 cars as well, particularly on 911s rather than Boxsters. I think these are green, blue, and black, or something like that. Same idea, just different colors. On the back of your gauge cluster, you can see that the plugs are color-coded. So the blue one goes into the blue plug, the white one goes into the white plug, and the black one goes into the black plug. So just make sure that you are aware of which plugs go where. It's kind of hard to mess them up whenever they're all kind of in their own spot, but that's how you get that off. Now that those are kind of removed and we have nice, easy access to the speaker cover, we're gonna pull that off. So that's where the low profile ratchet comes into play. These are going to be 2 T20 Torx bits or Torx screws. Both sides will have 2 of each. So let me show you how that's done. All right, so for the dash speakers, I do this kind of last other than the passenger airbag because they're kind of hard to reach. But essentially, this is a low profile ratchet. T20 is the bit that I have in there. So makes this a lot easier to kind of get these out, particularly this back one. If you have a tall one, you're not going to be able to reach it because that's about how much room you've got between the windshield. So this just makes it much, much easier. All right, once the screws are out, then we're going to need to pop these out. Use a trim removal tool if you need to. Mine are kind of loose, so essentially what you're going to do is pull up on the tweeter side and then pull away, and there's a little tab that you can see there that needs to go under the dash. So whenever you're installing, just make sure that you put the larger speaker side in first, and then whenever you're pulling them out, lift up on the tweeter and then kind of towards the A-pillar, and then you can pull them up and out from there. If you've got factory speakers in here, you will see this plug. You just need to wiggle that out, kind of just comes straight out, down. If I can get that. All right, I just didn't have the tab pressed in the right way. It's this little clip right here that you want to undo. I was trying to press it from up here and it wasn't moving it in far enough, so I just had to kind of squeeze further down closer to the actual clip, and then it popped out. That goes in right there, only one way. If you have aftermarket speakers in here, then it may look a little different. It may actually be easier, just with the 2 speaker wires that are usually just little press fit wires rather than an actual plug. Either way, that's how you get the dash speakers out. Repeat the same process on the passenger side, and then I need to get the center console thing out, which in this case, since I have the console delete, I'm gonna have to loosen some screws that hold in the actual center console. If you just have the normal box here that has like storage, or your HVAC is down here, you don't have to loosen anything around the center console. All right, so I'm gonna pull this DG3 console delete out. So first things first, we need to pop the little trim piece that covers the lower section out. So that just comes kind of out. Careful, there are a few plastic tabs on there. Then what we need to do is loosen these bolts here, this one here, and then there's one more on the passenger side. So there's two 10mm nuts. That's the driver's side, and then there's one on the passenger side right there. Those are what we need to loosen to get this out. And then in addition to that, it helps if you kind of go ahead and just pull the rest of this stuff off, so the shift boot just kind of pops up and off. And then there are two little plastic screws inside your ashtray. Once you pull that out, those two, I believe that they are T27 or T30, but they're just plastic, so really if you just have approximately the right size, those will come out. And then you can kind of loosen the whole front section. That allows you to lift this piece off. There's one other T20 right here that's underneath the shift boot that will allow kind of the front end of your console to lift up so that you can get the two pieces that are secured by the 10mm bolts kind of off of the actual bolts, because you do have to lift it up and over, and they're just little plastic tabs that are easy to break. So you just want to be careful. The reason that we have to take this out is because right underneath here, back here, is one bolt that secures the dash to kind of the center of the dash to the car. So all of that just for one little screw. All right, so just to give you an overview here, we have loosened the two 10mm bolts. We took out the two plastic T27s, T30s that hold in the ashtray button piece. And then there's one additional T20 right here. And then a T20 right here. Those have been moved, and that kind of allows the front of the console to move up and down, which gives you enough room to lift up on the plastic tabs that hold in the GT3 console delete. And essentially what I did here is I just kind of pull it straight forward, because all we need access to is that T27 right there. And just having this pulled away gives me enough room to get to that and undo it. Otherwise, I believe that you need to get this whole thing loose, which of course there's only like 3 more bolts. There's one at the back, there's one right there, and then there's one underneath this coin tray. I really just don't feel like taking that whole thing apart. So this is gonna do for us. Again, if you don't have the GT3 console delete, then you don't have to worry about that. That is the one screw that we're just trying to get to. Outside of that, all that is left is to take out the passenger side airbag. So with that being said, underneath the dash is going to be this plastic foam panel. There's two little flathead plastic screws that hold it in. So get yourself a flathead screwdriver. You can literally use your fingernails if they're long enough to twist those off. They're not in tight, and then that whole plastic piece comes down. All right, so here we are under the dash, passenger side floorboard. These are the screws that we need to undo, so I'm just going to twist these off with my fingernails here. That's one, and then there's another right here. So there's the other. Those will eventually go in our baggie that holds everything related to the passenger side. But essentially now you can just kind of pull this down. Take your time, look at how it's mounted. Essentially this lip kind of goes underneath the bottom of the dash, and then the back is kind of pressed up near where your AC condenser, air filter, or whatever is. We're just going to set that aside for now. And then up underneath here, we're going to see the vent. So that's this piece here. Kind of runs along here. There's a little accordion piece there. And then it runs all the way up to where it joins, kind of right there. You can see the little piece, that's where it joins with the passenger side air vent. So essentially what we need to do is disconnect that piece right there. So I'm reaching underneath. I'm gonna just pull kind of on this side. So you can also do that from underneath, but it was a little bit easier for me to video from the top. So now you can see that that piece is undone. Now what we're gonna do is pull that down from the dash, and then it's gonna disconnect right there. We need to pull it away from that piece. So now that we've got that out, we can see that we've got a nice view up underneath here. And this is where we're going to need the 13mm with an extension. So that's what I've got here, 13mm. If we go up under the dash here, you're going to see right there and then right there are two 13mm bolts. Those two hold in the airbag. Essentially what we need to do is get our 13mm on those two bolts, loosen them. They're really long bolts. And then we're gonna pull those out. Try not to drop them on your face. And we'll go to what's next. All right, so here we are. These are the two bolts that we just got out from underneath the dash that hold in the airbag. Hang on to these. I'm gonna throw them in my baggie that also includes the two little plastic screws that hold in the under tray. We'll set that aside. And then for the actual airbag, pulling it out, once those two screws are out, you should be able to grab it and just kind of work your fingers right above the trim strip and kind of wiggle it loose. And then it should come straight out, just like this. Once it's out, on the left-hand side, you're gonna find this cord. Looks just like the one that was on the steering wheel airbag. You just kind of wedge your finger up under there, pull that loose. That's the only one that you need. And now your airbag is out. Now, in our case, we're going to be putting in a Metropole Blue full leather dash. So we're actually going to take the gray vinyl cover off of the airbag and place it or replace it with the Metropole Blue one. All you need to do for that is just take a pick or a small screwdriver and hammer this out. This pin kind of goes all the way through, and just hammer it out from one side or the other, and then this piece will pull off of the airbag. You put your new one on and just slide that pin right back through. It's as simple as that. So now this is kind of what our dash should look like. You should have all of your trim pieces removed. And of course, I am forgetting the steering wheel column kind of surround. So let's knock that out and then we're ready to take the dash out. All right, so here we are on the driver's side again. I forgot about this piece. It's gonna be two Torx screws, one right there, one right there that we need to pull out. So let's go ahead and get those. Same thing on this side. All right, there's those two. Normally, I would take those out at the same time as the steering column, surround, and gauge cluster and kind of throw them all into the same baggie. But in this case, I'll put them into their own. So as a reminder here, we need to kind of unclip these. So whenever you pull this away, this will come loose, but you'll see that down here, we need to kind of pull up. And you may need to grab a trim tool and just wedge it in there and kind of pop those up and out of place, both sides. So right there, and then right there. And then this is going to be free, and we're going to have to twist it kind of out and around all of the wires. And you want to try to avoid the wires as best as you can, not to snag any. And then it just kind of comes off like that. Okay, so now we actually are ready to start unbolting the dash. With one caveat, up here, your interior sensor, there's going to be two T20 Torx screws. There should be one on this side and one on this side. As you can see on mine, it's missing the right-hand side. It does have the left-hand side, but it's not really screwed into anything. These are both very easy to lose and extremely hard to reach because you're right next to the windshield. And then of course right here, that's just a hole down into the air vent. So if you drop this down there, it's long gone. So I'm gonna try to wiggle this out. All right, so we got that out. That is not the right screw for this slot, but whoever put it in there last must have just made it work. So there's the two holes that we're trying to remove. Doing this piece that's right in the center, there is one more screw right here, and that is an actual dash screw. So that T20 right there actually is part of what holds the dash in. Since taking this piece out kind of makes me just want to quit, I would recommend getting that one out at the same time. That way you can quit and then come back later, and the rest of the screws are really easy. So that's where we're going to end this first portion of the video. We're going to come back in part 2 and go over each of the actual screws that hold in the dash, and then removing it and replacing the dash with whichever one is going back in. So just stay tuned, and we'll see you in the next video.